Hello everyone, and welcome back to Translationborne, the show where we talk all about translation, Bloodborne, and the translation of Bloodborne. This time, we'll be starting things off with a look at the description of another item associated with the executioners that we got from Alfred. Wheel Hunter Verification. This verification was issued by the exclusive workshop of the squad of executioners led by Martyr Ligarius. The wheel is proper fate. That is a secret place adorned by mad faith and mysticism, and became the power that supported the justice of the executioner squad. All things considered, that's a pretty short description, but there's actually quite a lot going on here, particularly when it comes to the translation. There are a few different reasons for this, but one of the biggest is that the opening set of lines include a great example of how preserving the structure of the original Japanese can be a problem in English. This issue is so pronounced that I actually opted not to highlight it in the earlier comparison of my more literal rendering versus the official translation. Literally, the first couple lines of the Japanese are just sentences modifying nouns, so to be faithful to the original structure, you end up with the squad of executioners led by Martyr Ligarius, a verification issued by their exclusive workshop. These lines are so disjointed in English it's hard to see the larger point, which is that it was the workshop used by the squad of executioners led by Martyr Ligarius that issued the Wheel Hunter badge. To clarify this in my rough translation earlier, I substituted the phrase, the squad of executioners led by Martyr Ligarius, for the word there in the second sentence, since it's referring to that group anyway. But the official translation takes a different approach, rephrasing the opening line from a sentence modifying a noun into a fact. Martyr Ligarius led a band of executioners. This conveys the same information as the Japanese, has the benefit of being in the active voice, and retains that short opening line feel, but uses the conjunction and to establish a link with the next phrase, this badge was crafted at their dedicated workshop. While this second line is in the passive voice though, note what the effect of that ends up being. One of the chief functions of the passive voice in English is to obscure the subject of a sentence. It's why the line, mistakes were made, can be used to avoid blame. In this case, what's been obscured is who exactly crafts these badges. Like the Japanese, this shifts the reader's focus to the location where they were made, the workshop, and it does it in a way that feels more natural than saying the workshop itself issues these badges. The ultimate effect is that these lines, which were so stilted and hard to understand in a highly literal translation, end up recreated in natural English while still retaining some important features of the Japanese. And remember that this is a different solution than the approach I took earlier. Even if my more literal version were to be more naturally phrased, so it read, this badge was issued from the exclusive workshop of Martyr Ligarius' squad of executioners, it still has a very different formulation. What's more, I'm sure there are other ways of getting this information across as well, with the best English version being a matter of preference. Really, the fact that so many different valid options exist is further testament to how sticking too close to the structure of the Japanese sentence is often a mistake, since what you're actually looking for is the best English language expression of the original idea. In fact, you can see this same principle at work in the next line, where the English is technically a bit more straightforward than the Japanese in explaining to players that the wheel symbolizes righteous destiny. In the original, this line is another simple statement that the wheel is righteous destiny. Since that sentence is obviously meant to be understood metaphorically, though, the additional explanation about the wheel symbolizing something both fits right in and sounds more natural. Honestly, I think this entire description stands as a great example of how big a difference making these sorts of structural and interpretive changes can make, and it's evident right from the first two lines. An overly literal approach gets you, the squad of executioners led by Martyr Ligarius, a verification issued by their exclusive workshop. The wheel is correct destiny, where the official version is, Martyr Ligarius led a band of executioners, and this badge was crafted at their dedicated workshop. The wheel symbolizes righteous destiny. The latter not only sounds better, it's more comprehensible. Now, I think this holds true in the official treatment of the second half of this description as well, but there are a couple of connections it's possible to make with the Japanese wording that I think are worth mentioning here. First, note that the phrase kyōteki na shinko is literally something like mad faith, which could tie in with the game's themes of madness. The official translation in this case is heady fanaticism, which somewhat limits the interpretation of the phrase to intense religious belief, though it does bring in a potential connection with liquor that might be relevant as well. The second arguable connection can be found in the term mystical, and this is because the term shimpi, which you may recall from the arcane stat, and which I've been translating elsewhere as holy mystery, forms the base of the Japanese word. Importantly, this is not the meaning of the word itself. Shimpi shugi is the Japanese version of the word mysticism, indicating a belief in the mystical, but there is still a tie to the arcane here that the official translation of mystical beliefs could be seen as obscuring. Personally, I think the phrase heady fanaticism is a great description of the executioner's beliefs, judging by what we've learned about them from item descriptions and seen in Alfred's behavior. And I don't see an issue in translating mystical as mystical, but I did want to mention these points because they could be used for differing interpretations of the Japanese text as opposed to the English. But we should check in on Arianna. How are you feeling? Still bad, I see. Well, maybe you'll feel better as the night goes on. As simple as those gasping cries were, though, there is something about them that I think is worth pointing out. You probably noticed that the first one was different from the second. The Japanese subtitles, by contrast, were exactly the same both times, consisting of 5 continuous representations of the sound ah followed by an ellipse. Obviously, since both subtitles are simply meant to represent Arianna crying out, it's no problem that they're the same, but note that this plays out slightly differently in English. That's because, as we've seen before, the English has made the stylistic decision not to represent these sorts of sounds in the subtitles. And while this can be confusing when we find the doll asleep in the dream, I think it works well here to avoid using potentially weird onomatopoeia. It's a small point, but I wanted to bring it up before asking Eileen about what happened to her.
Oh. Is that you again? I'm afraid I've made a bit of a blunder. I'm just going to have a short rest. No, don't worry. I've taken blood. Enough to save an old woman. No more dreams for me. This is my last chance. What a fool I am. I'll have to tread carefully. But that thing still lies in wait. Turn back. This is my score to settle.
Last time you said that, you ended up thanking me for helping out.
My prey lies in wait this way. Turn back. This is my score to settle.
I don't know if you've noticed, but I can be pretty contrary when you tell me not to do something. While I go ahead and act on that impulse, though, let's consider the translation of those lines. For the most part, I think the official version does a great job here, but there is one line that I'm inclined to interpret a little differently. When Eileen talks about the need to tread carefully in the official version, she opens by saying, "What a fool I am." This is treated as its own sentence, and in English it reads to me like she's regretting her mistake of underestimating her foe now that she only has the one life to live, followed by her resolve to be more careful. In the Japanese, though, her opening statement of "mittomonai hanashi," which is used to express her regret, is only separated by a comma from her subsequent statement about becoming more careful. That suggests to me that the thing she finds humiliating has less to do with anything she said before than it does the next thing she says, which is that she needs to be more cautious. In other words, I think she's ashamed of having to think more about preserving her own life now that she doesn't return to the hunter's dream every time she's killed. Thematically, I like this interpretation because it gets back to the first conversation our character has with Eileen, which was all about fear. If we keep talking to her after her initial greeting, she is at first understanding of our being unnerved by the beasts, until we talk to her again and she tells us we've done enough trembling in our boots. Way back in episode 2 of Translationborne, I mentioned that this seems to push us towards a certain balance of fear and courage. On the one hand, if we are utterly fearless in the face of the hunt, or even eager to take part in it, that may be a sign for a hunter of hunters that we're starting to lose our humanity. On the other hand, if we're so daunted by the task at hand that we're unable to do our job as a hunter of beasts, we've failed to live up to our obligation. So if we take that idea of needing the right balance of fear and recklessness forward, I think we can see a parallel in Eileen needing to fight with just the right level of caution to protect her own life, while still being reckless enough to defeat the blood-drunk hunters that are her prey. It's all about finding that sweet spot between the fear of death and the need to do her job. Having said that, though, this is just one possible interpretation of the Japanese. Another way of literally breaking down this line might be, "It's a sad story, but I will have to be more cautious, that's all." This of course lends itself much more readily to the existing translation. Still, I thought it was worth mentioning my alternative reading because of that thematic through line. Speaking of which, I also wanted to briefly discuss the difference between Eileen's approach to us and Alfred's. Alfred is apparently all about cooperation. He gives us items and a lot of information, but ultimately he's hoping that we'll help him complete his hunt. Eileen, by contrast, repeatedly warns us away from her sort of hunt. She knows what toll her type of hunting takes on people and wants us to avoid it. I see this as another revelation of something that's kind of always been out in the open, which is that as friendly as Alfred is, he's only using us, whereas as gruff as Eileen might seem, she wants the best for us. But let's see how she's feeling now.
Don't you ever listen to your elders? No matter. You did save my life. I don't seem to be apt for this life anymore. My glory days were long ago now. I know. Here. For you.
Well, if you insist, but I thought you didn't want me hunting hunters.
This too is hunter's work. But it bears no honor. A burden you may choose to carry. The decision is yours alone. Oh. My eyes grow heavy. Let me rest a while. I'll be fine. Just wait.
I'm not sure waiting's gonna help. Eileen? I guess we'd better let her sleep. While we give her time, though, let's talk about the translation for that set of dialogues. There are a lot of really nice touches in the official translation here, right from the opening line of, "Don't you ever listen to your elders," with the way it captures Eileen's mixture of exasperation and admiration. But probably my favorite set of lines in the official translation is when Eileen says she doesn't seem apt for this life anymore. That's because it manages to capture some of the double meanings in the relevant Japanese term, shiodoki. This word has three senses, with the most literal being a reference to either high or low tide. By extension, the second sense involves the ideal time to begin or end something. Its final sense is a reference to a specific time, typically the time of day with the most births or deaths. Given the context that Eileen is about to pass us the badge and the rune that marks a hunter of hunters, it seems clear enough that the primary meaning is that Eileen is taking this as the perfect opportunity to quit. However, I can also see a second sense here in that Eileen could be implying that it's nearly time for her to die. This would go well with an undercurrent that runs through the entire conversation, because for all that Eileen seeks to reassure us that she'll be fine, she's clearly in a bad way. In fact, the very next line of the Japanese, where literally she says she recalls the past frequently, can be seen as evidence of this. More than just the literal meaning that Eileen's been feeling reflective, I think it's meant to imply that the reason her mind is drawn backwards is because there's little left in her future. And both of these points are reflected in the official English, with the wording of the first line obviously supporting the primary meaning of Eileen thinking of quitting her job, but the phrasing of her not feeling apt for this life anymore also leaves open the secondary interpretation about her literally approaching the end of her life. Furthermore, by having her say her glory days were long ago now, the official English similarly conveys a sense of Eileen having lived a full life, which gets across the deeper meaning of the next line rather than the literal statement about recalling the past more frequently. As good a job as the official translation does, though, there is one point where I think the Japanese representation of a word may have thrown things off. This is possible because in Japanese, the same kanji can have different readings, sometimes with separate meanings associated with each one. So, if we switch to the Japanese audio for this conversation, we can learn something crucial about one specific kanji. Listen here for the phrase karyudo no go.
それは狩人の語さ。
That reading is important because it changes the meaning of its associated kanji. Normally, the character is read as gyo, and it means work, which is probably why the official translation was, "This too is hunter's work." But when read as go, you end up with the Japanese Buddhist word for karma. By this understanding, Eileen is saying that becoming hunter of hunters is the fruit of the actions of a hunter, but she then goes on to stress that our taking up that mantle is still an act of our own volition. Anyway, I'll have more to say about Eileen and the Hunter of Hunters position as we go forward, but for now, let's turn our attention to this boss and its name. There's actually quite a lot that could be going on here, though much of it is ambiguous. To begin with, there's the inherent vagueness of the kanji which formed the first part of this boss name. While it typically means star when read as hoshi and used on its own, it can also be used casually as a way of referring to a planet, a comet, a star cluster, or a constellation. Basically, if it can be seen as a point of light in the night sky, you can use the term hoshi. Since in this case it's modifying the kanji for realm or world, the full term seikai is probably a reference either to the world of the stars or a star world. But there's still a lot of vagueness there, to the extent that I think celestial, as used by the official translation, is a great fit. Where things get more interesting, though, is in the term shisha, which in this case likely means messenger or emissary. It's also the same word used to refer to the messengers that sell us items in the various shops in the hunter's dream. Beyond that primary meaning, though, there's a second sense of the word used to refer to a forerunner of things to come, a harbinger or portent. Understood in this way, these creatures could be seen as signs of what else is to come from the cosmos. But there are still more potential connections here, ones that hinge on a related phrase, tsuki no shisha. Literally, this phrase means emissaries of the moon, another reference to messengers from a heavenly body. It's an expression often used to refer to a set of characters that show up in the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, a classic Japanese myth also known as the Tale of Princess Kaguya. Towards the end of the story, a group of individuals sent from the moon show up to take Princess Kaguya back there with them, and these are sometimes referred to using the phrase tsuki no shisha. And in one final connection, in searching for the phrase online, I've seen it identified as a euphemism for menstruation, which could certainly fit the world of Bloodborne. Also, while we're on the topic of ambiguous interpretations, I wanted to take a moment to pay my respects to Eileen and the end of her quest line. It's another story that doesn't have a clear-cut ending. Yes, she did say she took enough blood to save her, but she didn't give me the impression that she was going to make it the last time we talked. Did she end up recovering and then walk away? Did she succumb to the plague of beasts after taking in enough blood to save her life? Or did she die? My own interpretation of these events is that she passed away and her body was eaten by crows, but we'll explore why I like that particular possibility more in a later episode. For now, I want to turn back to the one thing that the Japanese name for the celestial emissary does tell us for certain, which is that it comes from the heavens. Looked at in English, it's possible to interpret the celestial emissary as a being intended to be sent to the stars, but the kara in the Japanese name makes it clear that it comes from them. Now, I still think the official translation makes for a great boss name, but I thought it was an interesting point to end on since it involves some linguistic ambiguity in the English not found in the Japanese. Anyway, as always, let me know if you have any feedback for me, and until next time, thanks for watching, everyone.